The job listing called it a relief assignment. 6 weeks at a decommissioned forestry outpost 20 miles east of the Bitterroot Ridge. Just long enough to log barometric data for a university study that nobody at the university seemed to remember funding. The pay was bad. The drive-in was worse. But I had been out of work for 14 months, and my sister had stopped returning my calls sometime around the third missed rent payment, and a man with nothing left to lose tends to take whatever doors still open for him. The outpost sat on a flat shelf of granite above a tree line that had burned 20 years ago and never quite grown back. From the porch you could see almost nothing in any direction, except black snags and gray scree, and the kind of sky that made you understand why the old trappers used to talk about God, like he was a weather pattern. There was one road in. There was no road out technically, because the road in was also the road out, and after the first snow it became theoretical. I arrived on the 18th of October with a duffel bag, 2 boxes of canned food, a paperback I had been pretending to read for 3 years, and a Forest Service radio that only worked between 4 and 6 in the afternoon, when the relay tower at Connor caught the right angle of sun. The previous tenant had left the cabin clean. Too clean, I thought at first, the way a hotel room is clean, the way a place looks when someone has scrubbed it not for the next person but for themselves, to remove some trace. But I was tired, and I was paid, and I did not look closer. The work was simple. Every morning at 6 I was to walk out to the instrument shed, read the mercury column, the anemometer log, and the rain gauge, then transcribe the figures into a green ledger and transmit them on the radio when the window opened. Every evening at 1800 I did the same. The university wanted 12 weeks of clean baseline data from a site that had been dormant since the 90s. That was the whole job. I remember thinking, on the first night, that I had finally found work that could not betray me. The first week passed without incident. I learned the cabin's small noises, the way the stovepipe ticked as it cooled, the way the floorboard near the wash basin sighed under weight, the way the wind came down off the ridge at around 4 in the morning and pressed against the north wall like something testing a door. I learned to make coffee on the propane burner without scalding the grounds. I learned that the generator only needed to run 2 hours a day if I was careful with the lights. I started shaving again. I started sleeping through the night. The first thing I noticed was the ledger. The previous observer's handwriting filled the book up through the 2nd of September. After that, the pages were blank, which made sense, because the station had been unmanned from September through October. What did not make sense was that on the 6th of September, 3 days into the supposedly empty period, someone had written a single line in pencil. Wind NW 4 knots. Pressure 29 tight 91. Sun at 6:42. The handwriting was not the previous observer's. It was not mine either, though I checked, because for a moment I genuinely was not sure. I told myself a hiker had stopped in. The cabin had not been locked when I arrived. The supervisor had told me on the phone that nobody bothered with locks this far out. A passing hunter, maybe, with a sense of humor or a sense of duty, had filled in one morning's reading and moved on. I tore the page out because the university wanted clean data, and I burned it in the stove with the previous evening's coffee filter. I did not think about it again for 2 days. On the night of my stay, I woke before the alarm. The light through the window was wrong. Not dark, not bright, but the particular gray of a sky that has not yet decided what to be, and I lay there for a long time trying to understand why my chest felt tight. Then I realized I could not hear the wind. The ridge wind, the 4 a.m. wind, the one that had become as reliable as my own heartbeat, was simply absent. I got up. I went to the porch. The trees were still. The snags did not creak. Somewhere very far away, a single bird was calling, the same 2 notes over and over, and I stood in my socks on the cold boards and listened to it for what must have been 10 minutes before I understood that it was not a bird. It was too even. The intervals were too clean. It was the sound a bird would make if someone had recorded a bird and was playing the recording back through a speaker hidden in the trees. I went back inside. I made coffee. I told myself I had been alone too long, which was funny, because I had only been alone 9 days. At 6 o'clock, I walked out to the instrument shed and read the gauges. The mercury was at 29.88. The wind was calm. The rain gauge was dry. I wrote the numbers in the ledger. Then I waited for sunrise, because the protocol required a recorded time of first light, and I sat on the bench outside the shed with my pencil ready and watched the eastern sky. The sun did not come up. I do not mean that it was cloudy. I mean that the sky gradually brightened to a pale uniform gray, and then stopped brightening, and held there, and the eastern horizon never produced the pink that comes before the white, that comes before the yellow. I sat on the bench until my hands were numb. I checked my watch. It was 7:20. By any reasonable accounting, the sun had risen 40 minutes ago. I could see well enough to read the dial of the anemometer. I could see the snags on the ridge, but the light had no source. It was simply present, the way light is present in a room with the curtains drawn during the day. I went back to the cabin. I sat at the table. I opened the ledger and stared at the empty space where the time of first light was supposed to go. After a long time, I wrote, in pencil, overcast, no visible sunrise. I underlined it twice, the way you underline something to convince yourself you have settled the matter. That afternoon, the radio window opened, and I transmitted the morning's figures. The voice on the other end was a woman named Pell, whom I had spoken to twice before. She read my numbers back to me. When she got to the sunrise field, she paused. "You didn't log a time," she said. "Overcast," I said. "No visible disk." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was carefully neutral, "Copy that. Try again tomorrow." I asked her what the satellite was showing for my area. She said she would check and get back to me. She did not get back to me. That night I slept badly. I dreamed that I was standing on the porch of the cabin and the sky was the same gray, and someone was standing in the tree line watching me, and when I tried to look at them directly, they moved, not by walking but by simply being in a different place, the way figures move at the edge of vision when you are very tired. In the dream, I called out to them. I asked them what they wanted. They did not answer, but I understood, the way you understand things in dreams without being told, that they were waiting for me to do something specific, and that they had been waiting a long time, and that they were patient in the way that geological things are patient. I woke at 5:40. I went to the shed. I read the gauges. I sat on the bench. The sky brightened to gray and stopped. On the 12th day, I found the second entry in the ledger. It was on the page for the day before, beneath my own handwriting, in pencil, in the same hand as the first anomaly. Sun at 6:44. The numerals were small and neat. They sat just below my overcast notation like a correction, like a teacher's mark on a student's homework. I had not written them. I had been alone in the cabin all night. The door had been latched. I tore the page out. I burned it. I latched the ledger inside the metal supply box and put the box under the bed. The next morning, the entry was in the box. Same hand, same pencil, sun at 6:43. 1 minute earlier than the day before, which was correct, which was what the sunrise time should have been if there had been a sunrise, which there had not. I want to be clear about what I did next, because in retrospect it was the wrong choice, and I have spent a great deal of time wondering why I made it. I did not pack my truck and drive out. The road was still passable. I had 3/4 of a tank of gas and a working vehicle, and no contractual obligation that a court would have enforced. What I did instead was sit at the table for a long time and try to remember whether I had written the entry myself in some half-asleep state. I tried to picture my hand holding the pencil. I could almost see it. The image had the texture of memory, but memory has been unreliable for me since my sister stopped speaking to me, since the year I do not talk about, since the months when I was drinking, and a great deal of what I did was reported to me afterward by people who had been there. I am a man who has learned not to fully trust his own account of himself, and so when the ledger told me I had written something I did not remember writing, part of me believed the ledger. That is, I think, what the cabin was counting on. On the 14th day, the radio did not work during its window. I sat with the handset and turned the dial through the entire band and heard nothing but the soft, directionless hiss that radios make when there is nothing to hear. I tried again at 1700. I tried at 1900, outside the window, knowing it was pointless. Nothing. I went outside and looked at the relay direction, toward Connor, and the sky over the ridge was the same gray it had been for 6 days. And I understood without being able to articulate it that the relay was not the problem. That night I heard footsteps on the porch. They were slow and they were deliberate, and they stopped at the door. I lay in the bunk with the lantern off and listened to the silence after the footsteps with a clarity I have rarely felt before or since. I was not afraid in the way I expected to be afraid. I was something colder than afraid. I was waiting. After a long time, the footsteps moved away around the side of the cabin toward the instrument shed, and then I did not hear them anymore. In the morning, the ledger had a new entry, sun at 6:47, and below it, in the same neat pencil, a second line, observer present. I sat at the table and looked at those 2 words for a long time, observer present. It was the standard notation the protocol required at the end of each entry, to confirm that a human being had personally witnessed the readings. I had been writing it myself every morning. I went back through the ledger to check my own entries, and I found that for the last 4 days I had not been writing it. I had been forgetting, and someone or something had been adding it for me. I went outside. I walked the perimeter of the cabin. I walked out to the shed. There were no footprints in the frost which had settled overnight on the planks of the porch and the bare ground around the building. There were no footprints anywhere except mine. I want to describe what the next several days felt like, because the thing that happened to me out there was not a series of events so much as a slow inversion, the way a photograph develops in a tray, the way you do not notice the image appearing until it is already there. The light never returned to normal. The sky brightened each morning to the same dead gray and stopped. I began to notice that my watch and the wall clock disagreed by a few minutes, then by a quarter hour, then by more. I began to notice that the canned food in the cupboard was arranged differently than I remembered arranging it. I began to notice that when I spoke aloud to myself, the sound of my own voice arrived at my ears a fraction of a second later than it should have. The way a voice sounds in a large, empty room. Except the cabin was not large and not empty. I found a second ledger. It was in the bottom drawer of the desk, behind a stack of old topographic maps. It was identical to the green ledger I had been using. Same binding, same printed columns, but it was full. The handwriting in it was mine. I knew it was mine the way you know your own face in a mirror, by the small, ugly familiarities, the way I cross my sevens, the way I leave the loop of my lowercase e half open. The entries went back 6 weeks before I had arrived. They covered the dates the station had supposedly been unmanned. They were detailed and consistent, and they were in my hand, and I had not written them. I read the whole book in one sitting. The last entry was dated 3 days in the future. It read, in my handwriting, sun at 6:51, wind calm, observer present. Below it, in the same hand, was a single sentence I do not remember writing and which I am writing down now only because I want there to be a record somewhere outside of me. It read, he has stopped trying to leave. I went to the truck. I want to be clear about this part too. I went to the truck. I put my duffel in the bed. I turned the key. The engine started. I drove down the access road for what I estimated to be 20 minutes, which should have put me at the gravel junction with the county road, and instead, the access road delivered me back to the cabin. I had not turned around. I had not taken a wrong fork, because there were no forks. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine idling and looked at the cabin through the windshield and felt the cold settle into the floor of my stomach in a way I had not felt since I was a child. I tried again. I tried 4 times. Each time the road brought me back. The 4th time, the cabin door was open, though I had closed and latched it, and I could see from the truck that the lantern on the table was lit, though I had not lit it. I shut off the engine. I went inside. I sat at the table. The ledger was open to today's page. There was 1 line on it, in my handwriting, and I do not remember picking up the pencil. Sun at 6:49. Observer present. That was 11 days ago, or it may have been longer. The watch and the wall clock no longer agree on anything, and the calendar on the wall has become difficult to read, because the numbers seem to shift slightly when I am not looking at them directly, the way a word will sometimes look misspelled until you stop staring at it. The radio has not worked since the 14th day. The sky has not produced a sunrise since the 9th. I continue to read the gauges twice a day, because the alternative is to sit in the cabin and listen to the silence. And the silence has begun to have a quality I do not want to describe. I have noticed that the entries in the ledger now appear before I write them. I will sit down at the table at 6 in the morning, intending to log the readings, and the readings will already be there, in my handwriting, with the correct values I have not yet gone out to the shed to confirm. When I do go out to the shed and read the gauges, the values match. They have always matched. I have noticed that I am no longer hungry. I have not opened a can of food in some number of days I cannot determine. The cans in the cupboard appear to be the same cans, in the same arrangement, and I cannot tell whether I have been eating them or whether they have been replenishing themselves, or whether the question is meaningful. I have noticed that when I look at my reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin, the reflection takes a moment to settle, the way a video call lags, and that during that moment the face in the mirror is doing something slightly different from what my face is doing. Nothing dramatic. A different angle of the head. The eyes focus somewhere I am not focused. It is over before I can be certain it happened. I have noticed that the second ledger, the one in my handwriting, has more entries in it than it did when I found it. The dates extend further into the future now. I have not opened it in a long time, but I can feel it in the bottom drawer of the desk, the way you can feel a tooth that has begun to ache before the pain becomes sharp. I am writing this on a sheet of paper torn from the back of the green ledger, and I intend to leave it folded inside the cover, in case anyone comes here after me. I do not know if anyone will. I do not know if the road works for other people, or if it only stopped working for me. I suspect that the previous observer left a note like this one, somewhere in this cabin, and that I have not found it because I am not meant to find it, because finding it would change something the cabin does not want changed. I want to say one more thing, and then I am going to put down the pencil, because the light through the window has begun to brighten toward the gray, and at 6 o'clock I will need to go out to the shed, and I have learned that it is better to be ready. The thing that happens here is not, I think, malicious. I have come to believe it is something more like a habit, the way an old house settles into a shape, the way water finds the same channel year after year. Something at this station, long before me, began the practice of observing, and the practice continued, and the practice required an observer, and when the previous observer left, the practice waited. It is patient. It is very patient. I was not chosen for any reason I can identify. I was simply the next person who answered the listing. I do not believe I am going to leave this place. I have made peace with that, which frightens me more than anything else I have written here, because peace is not what a person in my situation should feel. I think what I feel is closer to what the gauges feel. If gauges feel anything, the calm of an instrument that has been correctly installed and is performing the function for which it was designed. The light is coming up now. It is the same gray it has been. Somewhere out past the snags, the recording of the bird is calling its 2 clean notes, and I can hear, Very faintly, the sound of footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate, the way a man's footsteps sound when he is coming home after a long shift and does not want to wake anyone inside. I am going to put down the pencil. I am going to go to the shed. I am going to read the gauges. The ledger already knows what they will say.